Hi there everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video I want to talk about what is one of the biggest and most important questions on everyone's mind right now, which is for DPS in the raid, which specs are going to be the best? What should I be looking to pick? Now, I'm going to give you some actual good insight, I hope, and some good guidance here. However, at the same time, I love this. This is a parody list from Blood Mallet, and I absolutely love this. Of course, someone in my guild linked it, Doge in my guild linked it. Because a lot of the guys in the guild are throwing around these like sims and stuff and DPS meters from the beta right now. The beta is the beta. Anything could change. It could all change drastically. They haven't done any tuning passes, so any of these damage meters you see on the beta from the testing of the bosses, it really doesn't matter. It might as well be entirely random like this, but Blood Death Knight in second, it might as well be entirely random. Stuff will change. Not only are they going to be changing things over the beta, but they're going to be changing things when the game goes live. They'll change things during the first week of raiding. They'll change things probably going into the first day of Mythic raiding. They may even change things a little bit after Mythic raiding. Usually once the Mythic raid opens, stuff is fairly set. But there's no way to be 100% certain. Now that being said, we can say some things, okay? We can say some things. So I want to draw your attention. This is a really cool spreadsheet. This actually came from, I think it was Babylonius here, who works on peakofserenity.com. I believe I found this spreadsheet. I think he made it through the Windwalker Monk discussion, which is by Sloot. So I really, really recommend you guys check out Sloot. He has these fantastic community discussion videos where he meets with leaders of different spec or class communities and really breaks down the classes in depth with them. But this is an awesome spreadsheet. I think this is so interesting because what this does is this is actually showing you the average performance of specs over the last 3 expansions, over the last 6 years of the game, and then also the averages for the classes over these last 6 years of the game. Because it's very easy to forget, I think, how good different things were. Like if we remember, like right now in our minds, it's probably very current that, okay, in Mythic Nyalotha, Fire Mages are destroying, Destruction Warlocks are destroying, Arms Warriors are destroying. And it's very easy for that to be like your entire perception of the game. But of course, this is only one tier. Things can be very different overall. So like some interesting stuff. If we look, the best spec on average for the last 6 years has actually been the Affliction Warlock. You can see in BFA, it didn't do that well. It was actually slightly under average. However, in Legion, it was the best damage spec on average. In Warlords, it did a pretty decent job as well, which, yeah, puts it as the #1 damage spec overall. So there you go. Affliction Warlock has historically, the last 6 years, been on top. Fire Mage has actually been on average a bit behind in Legion and BFA. It was miles on top in Warlords, which is kind of dragging it up there. The Shadow Priest was not great in Warlords, a small bit below average, not too bad though, but it was quite good in Legion and is extremely good overall in BFA. Then so on. So you can see this going through here. And then again, we look over here, the class averages. What are on average the best performing classes for DPS? Not really too surprising that Warlock and Mage are near the top. These classes have 3 damage specs. You can choose whichever one is best and players will flock to the one that's best. So it's very likely that these classes are going to be good. Warlock being the most likely to be good. Mages also typically doing quite well. You can see that they really stood out in Warlords. They've been decent since then, but not too amazing. You see the Priests, obviously Shadow Priest has been extremely good. Recently, they just got a big rework, but we'll see. Obviously, the risk with Priests is there is only 1 damage spec, so that's a risk. Rogues, of course, still historically done very, very well. They have 3 damage specs, so not too surprising. Like down at the bottom of the list, we can see that Monks have historically struggled an awful lot. The Paladins have struggled with average damage. Hunters, actually, despite having 3 DPS specs, have also struggled with their typical damage output. But this just gives you a feel for how likely it is for your spec to do good damage. And again, if I was betting, if I was to choose 3 classes to bet on to do really good DPS, and I'm happy to play any specs in those classes, I'd bet on the Warlock, the Mage, and the Rogue. I think those are your safest bet for the classes for raiding. They're very safe bets. So there you go. Now, I want to dive into a little bit more detail again. Over here, I made my own spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets. I'm a raid leader and I spend a lot of time making spreadsheets. I like my colorful spreadsheets. What can I say? But I just wanted to cover very quickly for the raid, right? You're going to be looking at a raid composition and you are actually quite incentivized to have a variety of classes, at least in some degree. The first aspect of this is, of course, your important utility in the raid. This is something you're going to consider. If you can fulfill one of these for your raid group, you are much more likely to get in. Although that being said, if some of these are already fulfilled for your raid group, this could be an impediment to you getting in. So, for example, we have the raid buffs. Priests with Power Word Fortitude bring 5% stamina. Mages with Arcane Intellect bring 5% intellect. Warriors with Battle Shout bring 5% attack power. Paladins with Devotion Aura, 3% damage reduction. Demon Hunters with Chaos Brand, 5% magic damage. Monks with Mystic Touch, 5% physical damage. And new, actually, in Shadowlands, the Enhancement Shaman with Wind Fury Totem bring 20% more auto attacks. So obviously you only want one of any of these. It doesn't matter if you've got a second Arcane Intellect, doesn't matter. You only need one of any of these classes, but you're fairly incentivized to bring these. In order of importance, I'd say probably Mage is the most important. Intellect affects your spellcasters and obviously your healers. And you're going to be fairly stacked on spellcasters. They'll be the biggest source of your damage and boosting up the healers as well. This is the most important one. Then probably magic damage from Demon Hunter. Then probably damage reduction from Paladin, because that's very useful to survive burst damage. Stamina from Priest is pretty solid. I'd say then Warrior, Monk, and then Enhancement Shaman are more towards the bottom. Obviously, attack power is going to affect the tanks. It will affect your melee DPS and your hunters. Physical damage, the same thing. The auto attacks only affects your tanks and melee. It doesn't affect the hunters. Well, survival hunter, but it doesn't affect the ranged hunters right now. I don't believe it affects pets yet. So that is something to consider. That's roughly the order I consider there. Then you also have some other big sources of utility that are very important. Bloodlust. I mean, look, you're going to have a mage for the intellect buff nearly always, so that's not that useful to have this on other classes. Like one Bloodlust is all you need nearly always. Battle res, again, you want a couple of battle reses in your team. It's quite likely that you are going to have a couple anyway. But if you are for some reason really low on these classes, which is rare, like you're definitely going to have one warlock at least. But having more battle res is quite good. Immunities can be quite important. Paladins have Divine Shield. They can also give Blessing of Protection for physical immunity and removing bleeds to their teammates with Blessing of Protection. That's very strong. Mages have Ice Block. Rogues have Cloak of Shadows. Hunters have Aspect of the Turtle. Havoc Demon Hunters have Netherwalk, a talent, which gives them damage immunity, but not like effect immunity. And they do have an immunity with meta. For 1 second, you're like immune to everything when you do a metamorphosis while you're jumping in the animation. You can see me actually use that on the Mythic N'Zoth kill. I actually messed it up once, and then I did it right once. So you can check that out in action if you want to in that video. That's kind of a niche useful thing, but it can be useful. It obviously was useful on Mythic N'Zoth. Death Knights can immune magic effects, anti-magic shell. So you have a few different immunities there that can be good. Warlocks obviously bring health stones. For raid defensive cooldowns, Warriors have Rallying Cry that gives max health to their whole, and temporary health, 20% to the entire raid. So that's very good for surviving burst damage. Havoc Demon Hunters provide Darkness, which is a 20% chance to immune damage, or to not take damage from any damage instant while you're in the darkness. So that's kind of okay. Death Knights now bring Anti-Magic Zone, which is 20% reduced damage from magic damage while you're in the Anti-Magic Zone zone. So that's good. Holy Paladins bring Aura Mastery, so that boosts up the Devotion Aura from 3% damage reduction to 15% for a few seconds. That's an extra 12% damage reduction. Disc Priest brings Power Word Barrier, so obviously it's a small radius like Darkness or the Anti-Magic Zone. That gives, I think, 20% damage reduction while you're in it. It's very good anyway. 25% maybe? I can't remember off the top of my head. It's strong though. And then Resto Shaman brings, well, a number of things, but they have their Ankh Totem, they have Earthen Wall, they have Spirit Link, which all provide like either bonus max health or some damage reduction, or Spirit Link is just a ton of safety. So those are like very significant defensive CDs. Obviously, these three are healer specs, like Holy Priest, Resto Druid, and Mistweaver Monk obviously don't bring any anything that boosts their raids max HP, like gives them shields or damage reduction. They don't have that. These healers do though. And obviously these three classes. And then for movement CDs, which I think will actually be quite important, all the Druid specs now bring Stampeding Roar. All the Shamans can talent into Windrush Totem, and Warlocks provide gateways. So those are probably the most significant movement cooldowns. So it's going to be very important that you bring these in. Just to give you an example, right? I drew up an example raid composition over here, which is kind of including some of these important things. So, for example, a Brewmaster can bring the Mystic Touch. A Disciplined Priest can bring Powered Fortitude and obviously a Barrier. Holy Paladin can bring Devotion Aura and also the Blessings. Havoc Demon Hunter bringing Chaos, Brand and Darkness. The Warrior bringing Battle Shout and Rallying Cry. Death Knight Anti-Magic Zone. Enhancement Shaman for Wind Fury Totem and Windrush. Arcane Mage for Arcane Intellect and your Time Warp. Warlock for Health Stones and Gateways. The Druid for Stampeding War and Innervate. And then I did put a Hunter in here as Ramirez. That's a little bit of a, what was that? Call of Duty, what, I can't remember, 4 Part 2? Modern Warfare 2, I think, you know, where like Ramirez is one of the characters, and that was the meme at the time. I'm probably this shows my age, I guess, but the meme at the time was, you know, one of the characters was Ramirez, and literally the missions were just Ramirez go do this, Ramirez go do that. It was Ramirez had to do bloody everything, like he fought the whole goddamn war himself. So that's kind of like the Hunters. The Hunters, especially with their mobility, because they're both marksmanship, and more so obviously beast mastery, are so super mobile, and they have like their immunities and everything like that, so they can do a lot of these different tasks that require heavy movement without losing much damage, while marksmanship will lose a lot, especially in true shot. But certainly beast mastery, it's the Ramirez do everything. They're one of the best classes for doing these like random little jobs in the raid. So I did want to put them in, as you're almost definitely going to want to hunt it. But like this gives you an idea, right? And just to point this out very quickly, when you're considering your raid comp, one thing that immediately stands out is, okay, Havoc, so your Demon Hunter, your Warrior, and your DK. Obviously only Havoc brings Darkness, but you could use a Vengeance. Chaos Brand, getting that in there is super important. And you can only get Chaos Brand, you can only get Battle Shout and Rallying Cry, and you can only get Anti-Magic Zone in the melee or the tank slots. That's it. You can't bring them on range classes, you can't bring them on healer classes. They just don't have those specs. These must be slotted into your, most likely your melee slot over here, or if they are very good tanks, you have that tank class, then you can bring them in the tank slot. But likely this is going to take up a good chunk of this. Obviously, if you want Wind Fury Totem, that is Enhancement Shaman only, so that is locked into a melee slot. Wind Fury Totem, I think the value will depend on how many melee you're actually bringing. Yeah, then you've got, for example, the Monk or the Holy Paladin. They can bring Mystic Touch and Devotion Aura and the Blessings. They can bring that in the tank, the healer, or the melee spot, but they can't bring it in range. So again, they're kind of locked into these. And yeah, that's kind of important. Obviously, the Priest can be in the healer or the ranged, and they're likely both to be pretty strong. Like Mage, obviously, Mage and Warlock have to be ranged. Hunter could be melee, but realistically, like, it's going to be ranged. And Druid can be anything. It's easiest to slot it into the ranged group, though, because you've got the most options with ranged. By the way, that's also worth pointing out. Ranged, you're going to have more range than anything else, so it's very easy to fit things into ranged. And then your melee, I just wanted to put this in to illustrate, like, 6 is really the max you want to bring to any particular raid fight in Mythic. And your range slots are going to be very limited, because to get these sort of mandatory buffs, it's quite likely that a lot of these mandatory buffs are going to be taking slots in the melee group. That's just very likely. So if I complete this slot here, you can see I think I included every single class, and this is just like a really nice and varied raid comp, I think. You see, we've got Brewmaster Prop Paladin tanking. We've got Disc Holy Paladin, Resto Druid, and a Resto Shaman for healers. Nice variety there. Again, the melee is 5 different classes with nice variety. The range, we've got like 2 of everything, and then 1 Shadow Priest at the end. So this is a very well-rounded comp, I would think. This kind of covers all the bases. It's got lots of variety. You've got lots of movement. You've got lots of raid cooldowns. You've got all the raid buffs. I think it's a nice, well-rounded comp, but this sort of gives you an idea of what like a sort of standard comp might be. I have another couple of examples as well. This was what Method ran on their world first kill of Mythic Gahoon. So they have 5 healers here. Interestingly, 2 Mistweavers. Brewmasters were just the best tanks. 2 Holy Paladins. You can see they even had a Windwalker in there, believe it or not. And then they were really stacking up on Warlocks and quite a few Hunters. For an even crazier example, this was Peace's world first kill of Unat in the Crucible of Storms. Probably the hardest boss of the entire expansion. So they brought 2 Brewmasters, because Brewmasters were just the best tank. They were better than everybody else. Only had 3 healers for this one. And then if you look at this, the only melee they had was Havoc, and the only reason they had Havoc was because of this. It was because of Chaos Brand. If Chaos Brand didn't exist, this Havoc would not have been there. And then it's just a whole lot of ranged, loads of Warlocks, absolutely loads of Elemental Shaman. Because just the fight was all about like this range damage, this funnel damage, and this range cleave, right? Then, for example, if we look at Limits comp and the most recent end boss on N'Zoth in 8.3, you can see this is quite a varied composition. There's quite a lot of different things going on here. Obviously, an important part of N'Zoth was having like good cleave damage. and very much having lots of immunities. The more immunities you had, the better. So they've got the Havoc Demon Hunters that could meta immune, the Thought Harvesters, Assassination Rogue, the Paladins could immune them, the Mages, the Hunters. They've got loads of immunities to cover that, which is important with this comp. And obviously Fire Mages were like the best DPS, so they've got like 4 of those. So yeah, you get sort of the idea, right? You get sort of the idea. If I show you what our tentative roster here is for Shadowlands, this is what our roster is looking like, right? So this is what I mostly gave people the option to pick what they wanted to pick, and it's actually turned out, I think, relatively well. You can see it's a very balanced comp. You know, our tanks are flexible to play whatever tank is best. The healers are quite flexible as well. They've got good variety there. Loads of variety for the most part in the melee. Obviously, that's quite a lot of melee. We won't bring all those melee to every fight. And then we've got, you know, lots of ranged with, again, a fairly solid variety of ranged. You know, another Shadow Priest to join me. I'm probably going to be playing Shadow Priest because I'm the only one who wants to. That would be nice. Or another Warlock would be nice. We just got a new trial in today. I don't even know what his name is. But yeah, so you get the idea. And then the final thing I just wanted to end on is I want to talk about this. So this is really important to understand as well, which is your damage profiles, right? This is the types of damage that you do. And in particular, I wanted to very quickly touch on Sire Denathrius, the last boss in Castle Nathria. I know that Fat Boss are back doing guides, so you can check out their quick overview of Heroic Sire Denathrius. That should give you a good insight into this. But obviously the last boss, like in Mythic at least, is usually way harder than the whole rest of the instance. Like if you think about Jaina, N'Zoth, Gahoon, like all of these, they take way more pulls. Like the last 2 or 3 bosses, and particularly the last boss, are where the big difficulty things lie. If you look at Denathrius in particular, this is what I think the damage sort of breaks down to. You can have a single target boss in phase 1, and then he's going to be spawning out these adds frequently that need to be bursted down as quickly as possible. So you got these burst AoE on short-lived adds. In phase 2, you're fighting the boss, so you're also fighting the second part of the boss, which is this sword flying around. So you got this 2 boss cleave, and they share damage between them, so damaging both is really valuable. And then you also have adds like all over the room, and there's like gaps in the floor, you can't get to them. So split cleave on these adds is really good. And range damage as well. And then in phase 3, it's back to just the boss on his own. He's fighting with the sword. It's just a single target boss. Execute, kill him before you run out of time and you all die because the room is running out of space, right? There's a few damage types going in here. I just want to draw the attention to them, and then we'll look at how we could apply this at Sire Denathrius. So in terms of damage, sustain versus burst, that's a big one. Right, so sustain damage is you're like always doing pretty much the same DPS. Good examples of Beast Mastery Hunter or Feral Druid. I've got 2 examples for each of these. So Feral Druid, you just put all your bleeds on, and then you're just biting at the boss, and that's kind of it. Like there's no big bursty cooldowns. It's just your bleeds are just always ticking. It's very consistent. Beast Mastery Hunter, you're going into your Bestial Wrath. Again, very, very frequently, which is your big cooldown, but that's popping all the time. So you don't have these big spikes, and then like, you know, like a Fire Mage, for example. Combustion, massive spike, and then you're not doing much in between. Beast Mastery Hunter is more like that. For burst damage, then in comparison, I put in Arcane Mage. Fire Mage is also a great example, right? Arcane Mage, it's your Rune of Power goes down, your Touch of the Magi, your Arcane Power, massive burst damage for like, you know, 10, 15 seconds. Then those wear off, and then your damage is really very low until your next burst, and then you explode, and you're doing loads of damage. The Ret Paladin is another wonderful example of this with Execution Sentence. What's their new talent called? Like Divine Reckoning or something at level 50? I can't remember now. But that's either... Execution Sentence is a single target burst CD on 1 minute. Wings, of course, is a massive burst cooldown on 2 minute cooldown. Or then this new talent at level 50 is like a 1 minute burst cooldown. That can be single target or AoE. So they do massive burst. Really, really big burst damage, right? And indeed, I think this is a good example. Ret can do single target burst. Ret can do really good AoE burst as well. Whereas Arcane is mostly single target burst. Beast Mastery sustains single target and AoE damage with Beast Cleave. Feral is more like single target sustained, and they can do a little bit of multi-dotting, but they're more single target, right? Just to give you an example of different damage profiles on even those ones. You also have Execute. These are classes that do more damage to the things that are low health. So all the warrior specs of Execute, literally. They do Execute, or Marksmanship is another example of a spec that will do a lot of damage in Execute with Killshot. Then single target. We've got single target funnel, split cleave, and AoE. This is sort of how I've broken it down. So single targets, you're fighting one thing. Assassination Rogue is really good with that. They've got decent sustain damage, and then very good single target burst damage with Vendetta. That's their big damage cooldown. 2 minute cooldown. You do like 30% more damage to that single target. So it's really single target focus. Just slam as much damage in that as you can. Survival Hunter, again, the same sort of thing. Loads and loads of single target damage. They're not very bursty though. They don't have a big burst like Assassination. They're much more sustained, right? Funnel Funnel is an interesting one. Funnel is where you're fighting, you know, like let's say like 2 to 3 targets or more, but you can turn damage on multiple targets into single target damage. So Elemental Shaman is the best example of this, I think. You put Flame Shock on 3 different targets, use those Flame Shocks ticking. That gives you more procs on Lava Burst, and you just keep flinging those Lava Bursts like at the main boss, the main target. So you get way more damage out of that from the Lava Burst, and then you generate more Maelstrom as well, and you can turn that into Earth Shocks. Or again, instead of spamming Lightning Bolt, you could spam Chain Lightning for faster Maelstrom generation, but again, turn that into Earth Shock for more single target damage. Affliction Warlock is the same sort of deal. Multi-dot the targets with your Agony ticking on multiple targets. That's going to give you more soul shards, right? So compared to just fighting in single target, you're going to get more soul shards because of this, and you can turn that into more damage onto the boss. It makes like their Dark Glare is going to do more damage to the boss as well. Their big cooldown, you summon in this big like eye demon, and he shoots a laser at the boss, right? That does more damage based on how many dots you have up. So the more targets that there are and the more dots you have, more damage he's going to do single target. Split Cleave sort of ties into this a little bit. So Split Cleave is the idea that if I've got one mob here, like one boss here, and then there's one boss over here, they're like 30 yards apart, can I actually do damage to them? So for example, a Havoc Demon Hunter, no chance in hell, right? I-Beam does not go that far. You can't do it. Destruction Warlock though, Havoc, right? Kind of, don't get confused. But Havoc for Destruction Warlock lets them duplicate their spells onto a second target for like 12 seconds every 30 seconds. So you can, you know, save up your Chaos Bolts and then bam, pop your Havoc on and blast Chaos Bolts at both things. You know, you don't need the targets to be together. They can be split. Same thing with the Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest, put your dots on the targets, right? Put Devouring Plague on both target. And you can keep that damage going even if things are split. You don't need stuff to be stacked up. And then finally, AoE. AoE is stuff is all stacked together. They're all in on top of each other, and you're just doing big bursty AoE damage. I kind of combined like just stacked cleave in with this and AoE because of the target caps. It's a little bit weird, but you get the idea, I think, roughly. So Havoc Demon Hunter, of course, I-Beam, Blade Dance, they're all hitting an AoE. You can talent into Fell Barrage now at level 50. Or they have this new talent. What's the bloody new talent called? It's like their old Legion thing, like Fury of the Illidari. You throw out these glaives and they spin around. It's 20-second cooldown, does big burst AoE damage. So Havoc has like really nice, good AoE damage, like a lot of burst AoE cooldowns, but lots of them, and they're on a short cooldown, so it's fairly sustained actually AoE damage. Death Knight also provides something similar. So a Frost DK with Breath of Sindragosa is going to do massive AoE damage, massive stacked AoE cleave damage. That's not like a big bursty. It's a 2-minute cooldown. You do loads in that, and then you're kind of chilling until your next one comes around. Unholy Death Knight, obviously they've got a bit of a ramp-up time, but once they get going, they can be popping their Epidemic. They can multi-dot with their dots, and they can actually do quite a lot of AoE damage, though it's more sustained, I would say, probably than the Frost DK. But you get sort of the idea here. And if we apply this sort of stuff to Sire Denathrius and the sort of the damage profiles, I've picked 3 specs to show a different thing. So with Assassination Rogue, single target boss and burst AoE adds in phase 1. Great at single target on the boss. Terrible at doing any burst AoE to the adds. The Assassination Rogue will be basically useless for that. Basically useless, but they'll do really good boss damage. In phase 2, with 2 bosses, wonderful for assassination. Put the ruptures, put poisons up on both of them, have that damage ticking over. It's also somewhat funnel for Assassination Rogue, right? Because they're going to get more energy from having their bleeds on more targets. So great garrote both the targets. Awesome. Split cleave adds. This is orange, is close to red. It's like, okay, like maybe every now and then Assassination Rogue could like sprint over, like dot up one of the ads over there and then come back to the bosses. They can do a little bit, but they're really not that good at it. And then finally for phase 3, single target boss with execute. Assassination Rogue is great at both of them. Single target, it's what it's really good at. And then execute, you can talent into execute with the what's it called? It's not dispatch, whatever. They've got a talent at level 15 that lets them proc free ambushes very frequently in execute, and they also have a legendary that helps them execute, so execute's a big strength for them. Havoc, in comparison, their single targets, it's fine, it's not amazing, but burst AoE the ads, the Havoc's gonna love that. They're gonna blow the crap out of those ads. 2 boss cleave, again, fantastic, like I-Beam, Blade Dance, blah blah blah. That's all cleaving anyway for free, so they're gonna love that stuff being stacked up to cleave it down. For the split cleave ads, not great for Havoc though. They're too far away. I mean, the Havoc can like zip over and start fighting them. It can do that. It can get over there quickly, but it has, you know, it's if they're 30 yards apart, it can only hit one of those things at a time. And then finally for the final phase, single target again is fine, but execute, Havoc really doesn't bring any execute, so it's not going to shine there at all. And then Affliction, which I think is a very high rated spec right now, looking like it. Single target's going to be really good at that. They actually do have a bit of burst AoE now with the new Reflection rework, so they're not too bad at that. They're not the best, but they're okay for sure. Then two boss cleave and split cleave ads. This is where Affliction's really going to shine. Just stand there in the middle of the room, freaking multi-dot everything and do way more damage on everything. They're going to be amazing. And then again, single target, they're very good at. And Affliction is really good execute as well with the Necrolord Covenant and with just the Drain Soul talent. So I think they're going to be very good there. And that gives you an idea. If I was to very quickly give you, like, again, if you look at our roster, you can sort of see the specs. I think this is a fairly decent roster. You're going to see some of the specs I think are going to be good. I think safe bets. I certainly think Warlock. We obviously want to get more Warlocks. I think Warlocks are looking very strong for the raid. They're a safe bet. I think Rogues and Havoc, they're always going to be fairly solid bets. Mage definitely stands out. I'd say like Warlock and Mage are your best bets. And then, like I said, going back to the example raid comp, these are the things you're almost definitely going to want. Like looking at the DPS in particular, Mage, Warlock, I think Druid's looking really good with Stampeding Roar on the balanced Druid right now. And they've got like good split cleave damage, good range damage. They're solid, good AoE. They're just solid overall. Hunter, I think having a Hunter is good. I'd be focusing more so on the ranged. Like I said, you're probably going to want one of each of these, but I don't know if you're going to want more than that. The good thing that these specs bring is they've got good burst AoE damage, usually the melee. Good burst AoE, good burst stat cleave, good just general cleave. And obviously these three melee in particular bring the big utility. So they're looking quite good. But there you go, guys. I think that's my predictions. I think some good info, hopefully, to guide you in terms of what classes might be good for the raid. Again, tuning could still happen. It's always possible that something that I think is a fairly terrible class, like a Survival Hunter, is quite terrible in terms of utility, and it's not great in terms of its damage profile. Like Sustained Single Target is okay, but it's not amazing. But if that's overtuned, like if that gets buffed and buffed and buffed, it could be the best spec just because it does so much damage. You never know. But I think that's a broad guide for now. I'll come back to you guys, of course, with more in-depth spec and guide looks. I'm going to rank all the specs based off of, their fun factor. Closer to launch, I can give you more insight into what's actually looking strong based off current tuning. I'll give you insight the first week of the raid as well. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know, because this was a very different type of video. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.